The Lord be with you. A reading from the Gospel of Q. Jesus said, "Nobody lights a lamp and puts it under a bushel basket. They put it on a stand so that everyone can see the light. Your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eye is clear, your entire body fills with light. But if your eye becomes clouded, your body is in darkness. Be careful that your light never fades into darkness. Beware, you who call yourselves perfect in obedience to the law. You pay taxes on mint and dill and cumin, but you ignore justice and mercy and honesty. You should practice these things first. You who claim to be devout are hopeless. You love sitting in the front row of the synagogue and having people bow down to you in public. You are like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the surface, but filled with death and decay within. Beware of those who load people down with crushing burdens of laws and regulations, but do nothing to help them. You have taken away the key of knowledge, but instead of unlocking the door, you have blocked the way for those trying to enter. You erect monuments to prophets who were murdered by your ancestors. They did the killing, you build the tombs. That's why the wisdom of God said, I will send down to them prophets and messengers. Some they will kill, others they will persecute. This generation will have to answer for the blood of every prophet shed since the beginning of the world, from Abel to Zechariah. There is nothing covered up now that will not be exposed. Nothing is secret that will not be revealed. Every secret you kept will become known. What you have whispered in hidden places will be shouted from the housetops." This is a word inspired by God. Football is a socially acceptable, culturally sanctioned, physically taxing substitute for warfare. Chess, on the other hand, is a socially sanctioned, culturally acceptable, mentally taxing substitute for warfare. Modern chess has its origins in 15th century Europe, but it goes way back, much further, more than 2,000 years back, into India, in fact. And in actual fact, the current world champion, chess champion, is an Indian, a guy called Viswanathan Anand. But it goes way back, and it was practiced and played in many cultures, including my own. In ancient Ireland, in the mythology of the Fíneocht poetry, which goes back to before the time of Christ, they talk about Cluiche Fichile, which is the Irish version of the game of chess. So it's been played all over the world, and there's some great stories come from chess. One of my favorite, I think it's from a Greek tradition, of a king who's challenged by a commoner to a game of chess. And they're trying to decide, what will the winner get? And so the king asks the commoner, he says, if you perchance beat me, and I don't think there's a chance in hell you will, but if you were to beat me, what would your demand be? And the commoner said, well, very simple. He said, chessboard is just 64 squares. I want a single grain on the first square. That's all I want. And 2 grains on the second square. And 4 grains on the third square, and 8 on the fourth. The king said, not a problem. Now, if you do your math, you know very quickly he's going to bankrupt not just the king, but the planet. There's a very elegant mathematical formula that tells you how many grains that's going to involve. It is sigma n equal to 1 to n equal to 64, 2 to the power of n minus 1. Calculate that. So if you put a single grain on the first square, and 2 on the second, by the time you get to the end of the first row, there are 128 grains. By the time you get to the end of the second row, number 16, there are over 32,000 grains on that one square. By the time you get to the end of the third square, there are over 8 million grains on the square. And by the time you get to the end of the fourth one, there are over 2 billion grains. And you keep going, you're only halfway there at that stage. So the commoner won, and he bankrupted the kingdom. But my favorite story from chess that's pertinent to what I want to talk about this morning is from Boris Spassky, who was the chess champion, the world chess champion, between 1969 and 1972. Now, even if you don't know chess, it's basically a game with, you've got 16 pieces, 64 squares, and the most versatile member of the group is the queen. She can move in directions that others can't with much greater ranges. But she's not the most valuable, because if you capture the king, the game is over. But the queen is easily the most versatile member of the whole group. There was a very famous game in which Boris Spassky, who was then world champion, playing for the world championship for another year, sacrificed his queen very, very early on in the game. And people thought he was crazy. They thought he'd made a really basic mistake. But the object of chess is to try to guess what the future configurations and choices are for the opponent, and try to see, if I make this move, what are my opponent's choices? And very, very quickly, it begins to move astronomically. So the chess champion is the guy who can figure out what are the long-term consequences of all of the moves I'm going to make and all of the possible moves that my opponent could make. And Spassky got it, that by sacrificing his queen at this untimely juncture, 15 moves down the road, he was going to trap the other guy's king. And he did it, and he won the game, and he won the championship. Which is what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the problem of evil, called theodicy. And I'm just going to make 3 main points this morning. So the first one I will call theodicy, the problem of evil. Secondly, I will say there is nothing either good nor bad. And thirdly, I will call it cosmic karma. So I take my first point then. The problem of evil, theodicy. It is the oldest theological problem on the planet. Since Homo sapiens sapiens developed about 50,000 years ago, and we acquired language, and for the first time ever, we could not just think, but we could think about thinking, and we began to wonder about the transcendent. We've been trying to figure out, why do bad things happen? And particularly, why do bad things happen to good people? And in theology, it's called officially theodicy, the problem of evil. Why bad things happen, or why bad things happen to good people in particular. And every single great wisdom tradition has had a shot at trying to figure it out. And all the great world religions have had a shot at trying to figure it out. So I'm going to give you a very quick review this morning of some of those hits in it. This is my own reconstruction of it. It seems to me that at the very, very beginning, as we were trying to figure out how this universe of ours worked, we were newly emergent Homo sapiens sapiens, just learned how to speak, and therefore just learned how to self-reflect and how to think about cosmic things and transcendent realities. We're trying to figure out the purpose of this. And what we create or invent or what we think is there are squabbling divinities who get frustrated in their internecine warfare, and they lash out at us human beings in a kind of displaced anger, like you'd kick your dog after you had an argument with your brother. So this was their first hit. We have no idea what's happening up there. We just know that these gods are squabbling with each other, and they're lashing out vindictively at us. And then at some stage, not only are they lashing out vindictively at us, they're actually co-opting us in their own internecine warfares. And 50,000 years later, we're still practicing that piece of it, getting caught in the internecine warfare of our alleged gods. So that was their first hit. They had no idea what was happening. There were these squabbling divinities who got frustrated and displaced their aggression on us and punished us, we know not for what. At some stage, we moved on, and we began to figure out they're not just doing it any which way, they're not just lashing out in frustration. There must be some kinds of rules to this game. But we have no idea what the rules are, and so the best response is just to duck and hope they don't hit us. But we're figuring out now there must be some kind of system to this. There must be some kind of pattern here, but we just don't figure it out. And until we figure it out, we're just going to lie low and keep down. And then at some stage, or the third stage is, we began to figure out, we began to infer what the rules of engagement were. But now, once we understood what the rules were and the commandments were, they were very difficult because they seemed to run totally counter to human nature. It's like, if it tastes good, it's bad for you. If it tastes good, you're going to get fat. If it's good for you, it's going to taste horribly. That was like what the law sounded like. Everything we wanted to do as human beings was against the law of God. So that was our third hit at it. And then came the great world religions. Judaism had 3 stabs at trying to solve this problem. The first stab was they figured out that God had chosen the Jewish nation as his own special patrimony, and he had made a covenant with them. And the terms of the covenant were that if they kept the covenant, he would give them a promised land and lots of children and protect them from their enemies. And if they didn't keep the covenant, they would be deported and exiled and murdered. And so now they had an explanation for evil. Bad things only happen when you break the covenant. That was the first stab at it. And then years and years and years later, after their exile in Babylon, in the year 598 BC, the temple in Jerusalem was flattened and Judaism was exiled. The last two tribes of Israel are exiled to Babylon. And in the 70 years they spent in Babylon, they came under the influence of the great Zoroastrian religion, the Persian religion of Zoroaster, which had a tremendous wisdom tradition. And so when they come back into the land of Israel in the year 529, having been set free by the Persians who had overcome the Babylonian Empire, they come back and they bring back a lot of the wisdom of Persia with them. And at this stage, we get the great wisdom writings that are found in the Old Testament. And in particular, the book of Job. And the book of Job is 42 chapters, which is basically a short story. Chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 42 are basically a short story, but between chapter 2 and chapter 42, they insert 39 chapters of exegesis, trying to figure out what the deal is with the problem of evil. So it's Judaism's second attempt at trying to understand why bad things happen to good people. And basically, Job is making the case that if you're a good person, God will reward you. At this stage in Judaism, God is one. They believe in monotheism. God is one. God is good, God is just, and they do not believe in an afterlife. So there is no place else to be rewarded, and there is no place else to be punished except here and now. And therefore, if bad things are happening, it must be because the person is a sinner. And so the ideal person at this stage has four characteristics. He's male, he's healthy, he's wealthy, and he's Jewish. So if you have these four characteristics, then obviously you're being blessed by God. If you lack any one of these, you're less than fully blessed. So if you're merely a female, but you're healthy and wealthy and Jewish, you got 3/4 there, but you're not fully there. And God forbid, if God really, really hates you, then you're born sick and poor and a shiksa. That's the pits. You're really in the out at this stage. So this was Job's hit at it. That, Job is totally convinced that he was a good person. He's been punished unfairly by God. And his comforters at him, no, you must have committed some secret sin, because there's no place else to be punished, there's no place else to be rewarded, there is no afterlife, God is good and God is just, so fess up, what do you do? That was their second hit in it. And then they had a third hit in it, almost in our own times, particularly after the experience of the Holocaust. And this was the notion in Orthodox Judaism that if we are Orthodox Jews, we are suffering vicariously for the sins of the world. God is visiting the sins of the world on us. We are suffering vicariously from others. So there were three stabs that Judaism had trying to figure out the problem of evil. Christianity came along, and I'm being a little bit facetious, but basically there were two great attempts at solving this problem. One was God punishes those whom he loves. Don't you feel very good? You're really happy now? If you're suffering, it's because God really loves you. And then kind of the version of that in spades was, there'll be pie in the sky when you die. So this is the vale of tears, but there's heaven to come. If you can just hang in there and stay with the program, you'll get heaven for all eternity. So pathetic efforts at solving the problem of evil. If you were an agnostic, then as you're thinking about this, you come to the conclusion, well, if God does exist, and I'm not sure he does or he doesn't, if God does exist, then he's either powerless, or he's disinterested, or he's a psychopath. And then if you're an atheist and you're totally convinced God doesn't exist at all, then there's no problem. There is no God, so just get on with it. Deal with whatever you have to deal with. So these were the initial hits in trying to understand this problem of evil. Which brings me to my second point. I call it, there is nothing either good nor bad. Now, basically, a lot of religious people came to the conclusion that everything that's good about life comes from God, and everything that's bad about life comes from human beings. Now, this is bad psychology, it's bad theology, and it's bad cosmology. But for a lot of people, that's where it is. They can't believe, they can't ascribe evil to God. So if evil comes about, it's because human beings created. God only creates good, not evil. So the question to that is then, who creates earthquakes and tsunamis? Is this of human origin as well? So what happens when a tsunami kills 100,000 people? Did that just happen? Did humans will this somehow, or did God create it? So that answer that God does only good and humans do only bad, that's totally facile. It doesn't address the question at all. So what we need to do is to try to reframe the issue completely. And many of the great avatars throughout human history have realized that we're asking the wrong kinds of questions. So Shakespeare would say very, very famously, he would say, there is nothing either good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. In other words, it's our interpretation that creates these categories of good or evil. Another beautiful, great, great mystic of the 13th century, a Persian poet called Jalaluddin al-Rumi, he said at one stage, out beyond right doing and beyond wrongdoing, there is a field. I will meet you there. So again, there's a realization that these categorizations of good and evil, they don't serve the dialogue, they do not serve the discussion, and they do not serve to understand how to be in life. There's a story you've all heard many times, I presume, about the Chinese man who had a horse, a poor man, little farm, and he had a horse that he used for plowing. And then the horse escaped and ran away into the mountains. And everybody said, oh, you poor devil, you. Now what are you going to do? Poor unfortunate man. Now you've got no horse to do the plowing. And the old man said, good luck, bad luck, who knows? About a week later, the horse came back with 3 wild horses in tow. And everybody said, you lucky devil, you know, you got 4 horses. The rest of us only have 1 each. And the old man says, good luck, bad luck, who knows? His son was trying to break in the wild horses, and one of the horses threw him, and the son broke his leg. And people said, oy vey. They didn't say oy vey, they were Chinese. You poor devil, you, it never stops. No, your son is after breaking his leg. And the old man says, good luck, bad luck, who knows? 2 weeks later, the Chinese army comes through and they forcibly conscript all the young men, but they can't take his son because he's got a broken leg. And people say, oh, you lucky devil, you. And the old man says, good luck, bad luck, who knows? So you never know until you reach the end of the story. The Native American peoples in this continent, they had an idea for which there's not even an English word, let alone an English sentence. The notion that we make decisions now predicated on the results for the 7th generation yet to be born. A kind of a long-term perspective. And Spassky in my story this morning is doing exactly the same thing, making a sacrifice now for a good in the future, so far down the road that nobody else can see it except himself. This is what needs to happen, it seems to me, as we try to wrestle with the notion of theodicy. We're asking the wrong kinds of questions, and we're creating artificial categories which are not helping the problem at all. It does not help to create categories of good or evil. It only helps to realize that as human beings, we're going through a process of evolution which starts off with instinct and then leads to free will and ultimately leads to freedom. So let me define what I mean by these terms. Instinct, obviously, is built into the first animals on the planet, which is kind of programmed responses to situations in life. It is non-volitional choice. It is where we subconsciously or instinctively react to situations to our own good. But we're not thinking the stuff through. Now, we all came from that place. That's our origin at some stage. But at some stage of the trajectory, free will is introduced to the equation. And what's free will? What's the difference between free will and freedom? Free will is the ability to do as I please. Freedom is the ability to do as God pleases. There is a huge difference between free will and freedom. Free will is basically the ability to exercise my own choices come hell or high water. But I am not free if I'm exercising free will. There's a definition in Catholic theology which is very interesting. Freedom is the ability to choose the good. To the extent that I do not choose the good, to that extent, I am not free. I'm merely exercising free will. And there's a huge difference between free will and freedom. So somebody who's stuck at instinct is merely an addict. Somebody who's stuck in free will is merely a narcissist. Somebody who has reached freedom is an avatar. That person is in fullest alignment. Now, the journey of life, it seems to me, is not about pigeonholing experiences into good experiences or bad experiences, evil stuff or good stuff. It is about meeting life on its own terms so as to move from mere instinctual responses to life to free will responses to life and ultimately into free responses to life. And God, as the game has evolved, has given us more and more abilities to make these kinds of choices. So the first land animals, reptiles, they're driven totally by instinct. They're pre-programmed to make responses to life situations. Only with the advent of the mammals, about 245 million years ago, do you get a limbic system which allows us to have emotions and to be able to make choices on the basis of emotions. When you introduce emotions, as well as a sensorium, then the range of choices is huge. As long as you only have senses and instinct, there is no free will. Only with the introduction of emotions is there the beginning, the burgeoning possibility that there are choices available to us. God is making the game more beautiful and more complex. At some stage with the advent of the hominids, there came beings who also had the intellectual capacity to make moral choices. That was a huge advance as well. So God is making the game more beautiful and more complex. As it moves forward, we get the opportunity of exercising not just free will, but the opportunity of exercising freedom. And so when you look at any situation, it seems to me there is absolutely no point. It serves us not at all to pigeonhole stuff as good or bad. I don't care what the situation is. Take world hunger. Is world hunger evil? It is a meaningless category to say world hunger is evil. It does not serve us. What does serve us is to say, faced with the fact that there are millions and millions of people starving in our world, what is the appropriate response? Pigeonholing it as good or bad is a meaningless exercise. Only what response is it going to call forth from me? And I look at world hunger, and I can make one of four choices. I can decide what's causing world hunger, maybe particular economic models. So let me buy stock in the groups that are creating it, because obviously they're successful. Let me buy stock in Monsanto or some group like that are causing world hunger. That would be one response to it. A second response would be just to ignore it. I can't do anything about it. I got to pay my mortgage. I can't solve world hunger. That's the second response. A third response is to get really angry at the systems that cause it and the people who perpetrate it, and that's not very helpful. And the fourth response is to try to reach out in compassion. Unfortunately, even those among us who are attempting to reach out in compassion, often our compassion is diluted with a lot of anger for the perpetrators. And so we're reaching out one hand with compassion and the other hand with anger. And that's diluting our effort. If we really want to solve all these problems, we have to stop pigeonholing them or good or bad. There is nothing either good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. Shakespeare was absolutely right. What response will I make to it? Will it be a response of cashing in on it? Will it be a response of ignoring it? Will it be a response of being angry about it? Or will it be a response of compassionately reaching out, not just to the victims, but to the perpetrators and the systems, so that we make everybody a part of the solution and not create a group of good guys and bad guys, good stuff and bad stuff, fortunate stuff and misfortunate stuff. We have chosen to take part in this journey of life. We have chosen to exercise the possibility of moving from mere instinct into free will, and from moving from mere free will into freedom, the ability to be so totally aligned to love that our response to all the participants in the drama will be to reach out with compassion to them. Which brings me to my third point. I call it cosmic karma. And I'm spelling it with a K. In Greek, they differentiate between cosmos with a K and cosmos with a C. Cosmos with a C is the physical universe in which we find ourselves. Cosmos with a K is both the physical universe and the spiritual energy template from which the physical world comes, or the physical universe comes. Now, just as in the physical universe, there are laws, there are ways in which this universe works. And over thousands of years of science, we have tried to infer what these rules might be. The universe did not come with a handbook, and therefore we didn't know about gravity, or Newton's laws of motion, or the second law of thermodynamics. We didn't come knowing these things. We had to look at how nature works, and we had to infer the rules of the game. Nobody gave us a handbook. And the same thing with the spiritual cosmos with the K. There is no handbook given us. We are blessed with the ability to infer from the consequences of our choices how the system works. And chief among these is the law of karma. Karma is totally misunderstood. We think karma is a punitive model in which God punishes us in future incarnations for mistakes we made in present or past incarnations. Karma has nothing got to do with punishment. It has everything got to do with education. It has everything got to do with the deductive and inductive capabilities of inferring from the consequences of our actions how the game works of which we are a part. And so very, very basically, karma is the basic law of the universe, both of the physical universe and the metaphysical universe. If you do A and B happens, and you like B, keep doing A. If you do A and B happens and you don't like B, stop doing A. But unfortunately, we're really, really dumb because we keep making choices that create consequences that we don't like. We continue to create economic models which totally starve millions of people on the planet, and we see the evidence, and we're making no changes in our economic models. We keep creating political systems in which we disenfranchise millions of our own citizens, and we cripple billions of people in our foreign policies. And I'm not just talking about our country, I'm talking about lots of other countries. But we refuse to see the consequences of our choices. We're not learning from the law of karma. We create military models in which we regularly dye the fabric of the planet with the red blood of innocent victims, but we still don't put A and B together and realize that B is happening because A has been put in place. And most devastatingly of all, we've created religious models which have set people against people for the last 2,000 years in particular, all claiming divine scriptural revelations for the injunctions to commit ethnocide against people who believe in the same God. We're still not realizing B is happening because we're engaging in A. And so at what stage do we get it? That the basic law of the universe is the law of karma. And it's not punishment, it simply is, guys, look at the consequences of the choices you're making, and if the consequences are good, keep making the same choices. If the consequences are not good, start making different kinds of choices. And so in a sense, the essence of the law of karma is the practice of the present moment. It is realizing that nothing happens by chance. There's no coincidence, there's no good luck or there's no bad luck. Rumi was right, the old Chinese farmer was right, the Native American people were right, Spassky was right. There's nothing either good nor bad. The present moment is the logical, inevitable, consistent outcome of all the choices and all the decisions made by all the players, whether that's at an individual level, on a family systems level, at a national level, or at a global level. Every situation in which we find ourselves is the logical, consistent, inevitable outcome of all of the choices and all the decisions made by all the players in that particular drama. We have to realize that that's how it works. So we have to accept this is the present moment. Maybe I wish it were otherwise, but it's not. It's what it is. I can only get to where I want to go from starting where I find myself to be. And so I accept the present moment as a gift. And then I make the kinds of choices that create the future. Because there is no preordained, inevitable future. There's only the logical, consistent, inevitable outcome of the choices and decisions we are making now as human beings on our planet. Whether this is in interpersonal dynamics, or it's at a national level, or at a global level. We will create the future based totally and only on the choices and the decisions we make in the present moment. So the practice of the present moment is the real way to move merely from free will into freedom. We have basically two choices as we look at our interpersonal dynamics, as we look at our global situation, or we look at our national situation, and it is that we can try to create categories, meaningless categories of good or evil, and put the good guys and the bad guys there. That's one road. Or the other road is to accept life on its own terms and say, this is life offering me the opportunity to move from mere instinct into free will, and to move from merely free will into freedom. There's a story told in the Sufi tradition about some man who was coming home late at night, and he saw a guy casting about on the ground, obviously looking for something. And he said to him, can I help you? Did you lose something? He said, yeah, I lost my keys. So they bent down, they're looking around for about 5 minutes, and the second guy says, are you sure this is where you lost them? And the guy says, no, he says, I actually lost them over there, but this is where the light is. I had exactly the same experience last Thursday, literally. I was coming down from my home in Hillsburg, and the first 5 miles is just a dirt road. And I'm driving down, and I come around the corner, and a rabbit jumps out onto the road in front of me. So I slow down, hoping that he'd just go off into the bush. I go very slowly, and he just runs along the road in front of me. And so at some stage near this, I accelerate, saying, can I pass him out? He accelerates, and he stays ahead of me. He goes around the corner, so I stop my car and wait for 2 or 3 minutes. And then I go around the car. There he is in the middle of the road waiting for me, and he takes off again. For 2 miles of the road, he went ahead of me, and there was millions of opportunities to go to the left or to the right. And I finally figured out, why is he staying in the middle of the road? This was broad daylight. It wasn't like he was like a deer stuck in the headlights. This is broad daylight. Why is he running on the roadway? And I finally got it. He's running on the road because it's a lot easier to run on the road. If he went off into the bush, it's much tougher running in the bush. So even though he thinks he wants to escape, he stays on the road because it's easier to stay on the road. So I'll finish with an adaptation, a mangling of a famous statement. Two roads diverged in a wood. The rabbit took the road more travelled and got exhausted. The avatar took the road less travelled and got enlightened.